This video is about what appears to be humanity's greatest achievement, a series of adventures into the final frontier, up into the sky. We've always been fascinated by how birds can fly. We figured out how to fly in 1903, and over the next few years and half-century, humanity learned how to fly further, faster, and higher, even leaving the Earth. So let's look back and admire. And that should be recognizable. I've left my home in California to visit Hutchinson, Kansas, home of the Kansas Cosmosphere and Space Center.
Welcome to the Cosmosphere!
The Cosmosphere was founded in 1962 and is home to the Hall of Space. With gallery after gallery, this museum is a wonderful place. Second only to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., the artifacts and storyline just fascinated me. Simple chemical reactions gave birth to rocketry, and we used rocketry for our greatest odysseys. We begin with its dark past, in Nazi Germany during World War II, with a maniac named Hitler and his distorted worldviews. Seeking vengeance for air raids, he decided to debut vengeance weapons on rockets, the V-1 and the V-2. He caused a lot of damage and left many dead, but when he still lost the war, he put a bullet in his head. Germany was occupied by Hitler's enemies, the USA and USSR, who took German rocket scientists, but not to reach for the stars. Instead, they were reaching for arms. An arms race made them enemies, so the Berlin Wall was built, splitting Germany. The USSR launched the first satellite, starting the space race and giving the USA a fright. Yet, hubris ran through the USSR for thinking that the USA couldn't beat them to the stars. The USA's Vanguard launch was a failure. Before it took off, it blew. The USSR laughed, calling Vanguard crushed grapefruit. So the USA made a new space agency, NASA, and they gave it a goal to put a man on the moon and to plant a flagpole. NASA realized that it was at a crossroads. They had to get their launches under control. You can't go to the moon if your spaceship explodes. Many launches failed in explosions. To the USA, it was an embarrassment. With a goal to go to the moon, NASA's success rate was only 39%, but they learned with every failure, and they fixed what went wrong. Their success rate would rise because their work ethic was strong. But before launching humans out into the far reaches of space, NASA decided that they should first send up an ape. California Science Center has the capsule where inside was a chimpanzee named Ham who's hoping he doesn't die. The San Diego Air and Space Museum has what looks like the couch that he was strapped into, and it looks uncomfortable. Ouch! Thus, Project Mercury was born. Back in the Cosmosphere, the story continues. NASA chose astronauts and made pressurized suits. They made tons of calculations and laid out their plan and sent their first man into space, making their first stand. The next launch was successful and the astronaut was saved, but when the spaceship Liberty Bell 7 landed in the water, it sank. The spaceship was lost until 1999, when it was recovered from the waters, restored, and put into this tank, now on display at the Cosmosphere. The next mission they flew was on the Friendship 7, which had to orbit the Earth from high up in the heavens. The Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. is where it is now, and before they knew it, they had moved on to the next phase somehow. Gemini 4, featured here, was where they did their first spacewalk. Gemini 10 was able to accomplish double rendezvous and successful docks, while Gemini 11 tested a way to make artificial gravity, because you gotta first learn how to fly if you want to explore the galaxy. Overall, Project Gemini was a success, and it left them confident with what they could accomplish next. Since the dawn of civilization, the moon was mysterious to us, but in the 1960s, it was the moon or bust. NASA had come a long way and had suffered through some dark days. But each expedition up into the sky brought them closer to sending people to the moon and returning them back alive. They were almost ready to fly to the moon. They built the special spidercraft called the lunar module and simulated cartoons, as well as special cameras to document the monumentous event. A total of $23 billion is what the USA spent. The grand scale of these missions leaves one in so much awe. It's no wonder NASA named their projects after Greek and Roman gods. So this is a model of the Apollo 9 spaceship, basically, in its entirety. And of course, this is the service module, and this is the command module. Now, if you want to see how big one of those are, we'll just turn around and show you right here. This is the Apollo 9 command module, Gumdrop, that tested the first lunar module, Spider. Apollo 10 went to the moon and did everything but land. They were Charlie Brown and Snoopy. Things were going just as planned. Apollo 11 was where the moon landing would take place. The lunar lander was Eagle, and a module, Columbia, just in case it shows up in your next game of trivia. It sits in the Smithsonian's main floor, and it's been so aggrandized that people all over, like me, come to see it with their own eyes. It's the literal pinnacle of reaching for the sky, which is why it's so honored in the most obscure art forms, like riding a 300-foot rocket-powered bull by its horns. The mission is so significant, it shows up prominently in the Tunnel of Time, where they feature Neil Armstrong's boot print and moon grime. It wants me to step on it. I stepped it on it. And then I remember reading that this is actually Buzz Aldrin's boot print, not Neil Armstrong's. Back in Kansas, I behold something so shiny where it sits, prominently lit, dominating my attention. Holy shit, it's a moon rock. Reflective grains, tiny pits. I spent a long time looking at this rock and taking lots of pics. Picked up by Neil and Buzz when they walked on the moon. The rarest of the rare inside this giant room. They'll do the same thing again in Apollo 12, landing in the Ocean of Storms, with Pete Conrad and Alan Bean. Then, something went wrong with NASA's next mission, Apollo 13. The command module sits here under the Cosmosphere, so the crew came back all right. 45 years later, in San Diego's Air and Space Museum, the crew talks about what happened out there in that dark frontier.
I was coming down from the lunar module into the command module when suddenly I heard that big hiss bang. And everything walked back and forth, lights came on, the jets were firing, noise all over.
We had lost one ops one time, because there were several meters were down at the bottom of the gauges. They were different sensors, so it's unlikely to get multiple sensor failures, so I knew we lost tank 2.
The official, and that's what we'll call official, is Houston, we've had a problem. Now, Spiker was the first person to say that. And Spiker said, and I think he said, Houston, we have a problem here. Then Jack Rosbud came back and said, say again, please. And then I said, Houston, we've had a problem. We have a class B undervolt. That's right, class B undervolt. And that was the actual communication.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt.
It's one thing to read about a group of people's great deeds. It's another thing to meet them, hearing about the zooming speeds that they traveled to reach the gray orb just beyond, record-breaking speeds that come from simple chemical bonds. Gene Cernan was the last one on the moon, which corresponds with this statue of him standing on the lunar surface one last time. The fact that we haven't been back since feels like a crime. We brought back a lot of moon rocks and a lot of pictures too. Maybe someday the USA will return to the moon. The last Apollo mission docked with the USSR Soyuz. Former enemies joined, making remarkable news. But after that, the dream changed. We started thinking of Mars and sent robotic emissaries to explore planets so far, from Viking to Voyager and Galileo too, going where we want to go to do what we want to do. From New Horizons to Curiosity, all played important roles in exploring the space odyssey. And so far, the crown jewel is the International Space Station. We built it sending space planes, making a space workstation. Lots of countries are involved and lots of science happens here. From miles up in the sky, looking down brings me tears. Brought up piece by something called Space Shuttle Orbiters, giant space planes, including one named Endeavour. Now retired, the Cosmosphere has a replica in its lobby showing off its size, but it's only the body. It leaves one to wonder, even if it is fake, it's such a cool looking plane, just look at those brakes. It even has a toilet that Apollo didn't have, just under their gift shop where they have lots of grabs. If you want to see the real Endeavour, that one's back in Cali. So let's take this replica one out over there to go see. Departing Kansas into Cali was a little more boring than that. Either way, I hope that little bit gave y'all a laugh. I made my way to the California Science Center in LA where Endeavour was at. A whole gallery about it representing the past and how it made its way through the streets of LA with pure might. Whatever helped it succeed was set up within sight. It wants me to touch it. Touch it in it! Burnt rubber. As I was looking around, I was surprised. Like, what? I didn't even know what half of this spacey stuff does. I know what that is, though. The suction toilet on Endeavour, as a matter of fact, yo. And because Endeavour was launched into space for about 25 missions, that little toilet seat worked overtime. That's what I call ambition. Wherever I turned, there was more to see about the mission and the spaceship that interested me. In this corner was footage of all of the blast-offs. It looks kind of artsy, and here was a recreated mission control center, which was nothing compared to the beautiful space shuttle Endeavour. Even when you're aware of its enormous size, it still surprises me how high my eyes have to rise so I can witness the majesty of what this plane is and what this plane has done before I feel so lucky. Bearing its scars, I felt like a kid looking through damaged tiles and other wounds throughout this rig. You see there's a couple damaged tiles. There's one right here, there's one right here, and there's one right there. That one actually looks like it cut through. There's some right there. Damaged tiling. I may never go to space, but thanks to these trips, I think I know what it would feel like to be on board a spaceship. The story I've just told about 1,000 years from now will be told to younger generations. Powerful. Wow.